The ignition is on right now, but when we turn it off after a few seconds, without touching the vehicle, it turns itself back on. Really, really bizarre. Hi everybody and welcome back to a new episode of DiagnoseDan. Today in the shop we got a 2010 Nissan Juke. Now this is quite an interesting case because this car is a no crank, no start, no comm, and when you turn off the ignition, the car turns itself back on. So it's kind of stuck in a loop. Now hopefully we can diagnose this one together. This car was towed to me from Belgium, and in Belgium another shop already took a look. They also replaced some parts. We will take a look at that later. Now the customer's story is that he drove home, the check engine light came on, and besides that the car drove fine. He parked the car at home, and when he wanted to leave for work the next morning, it was a no crank, no start. Now when he wanted to turn off the ignition, the car turned itself back on. So basically he could no longer turn off the ignition. He took the car to a shop, or the other shop picked it up. They tried to read fault codes, but it is a total no comm. They tried to replace some parts, but unfortunately nothing fixed the vehicle. The vehicle is here now, and in the next step, let's confirm the customer's complaint. Now, since the customer could no longer turn off the ignition, right now the battery is pretty weak. So the first thing we did is we started charging the battery. Now, obviously, we disconnected the battery terminal because the car wouldn't turn off. So in the next step, I need to reconnect the battery terminal before we can confirm the customer's complaint. I reconnected the battery terminal, and let's try to confirm the customer complaint. Now let's try to start the vehicle. Let's push the brake. Now let's try to start it. And as you can see, the ignition does turn on, but the vehicle doesn't start. Now let's try to turn the ignition off. The ignition turns off, but after a few seconds, it turns back on. Now let's try that one more time. Turning the vehicle off, I'm not touching the vehicle, but it comes right back on. Now this vehicle is almost like it's stuck in a loop. It doesn't want to turn off the ignition. Now another symptom we have is that as long as the ignition is on, the cooling fan keeps running. Now as you can see, it was literally towed here from Belgium, as you can see. Now obviously, if we want to turn off the vehicle right now, we have to disconnect the battery terminal. And when we reconnect that, the vehicle doesn't come on, there we go, until we push that start button again. So right now, it is off, and it only comes on, or there we go, it only comes on when we hit the start button. But obviously, right now, it won't turn off again. To diagnose this vehicle, we need to have the ignition turned on, but when the ignition is turned on, the cooling fan comes on full speed and it's quite noisy. So I want to see if we can shut down that cooling fan for the remainder of this diagnosis. Now let's see if we can disconnect it. Of course, we need to remind ourselves that when we return the vehicle to the customer, we reconnect this connector. That was quite noisy, and this is a lot better. I was also told the vehicle was a no comm. A no comm means that the vehicle doesn't communicate with the scan tool and we can't read fault codes. So I hooked up a scan tool and it's scanning right now, but as you can see, all the modules come up gray, and gray means either not equipped or not responding. Now, I know for sure some of these modules are equipped, but none of them is responsive. Now, I don't know all the details of all the parts they changed to try to fix the vehicle, but some things are pretty obvious, like this ground cable, which is definitely not original. Now, this messes with my OCD because a ground cable is not supposed to be red, so I'm definitely gonna replace this, because I can't live with that. Now, another thing they did is, what I know for sure, is that they replaced the BCM. Now, this BCM is the original one from this vehicle. Right now, there is a junkyard BCM installed. Now, they also replaced a bunch of other parts. This is the original ground cable or ground wire, which I'm going to reinstall so I can sleep at night. Now, they changed a bunch of parts and they probably didn't tell me everything, but none of the parts that were replaced fixed this vehicle. Besides what I was told, there are some other things that I noticed, like the climate control. Now, although the climate control is on right now, and it's even blowing a little bit of fresh air, it is not responding to my input. So I can turn the knobs, I can push all the buttons, but nothing changes. Also, nothing changes in that screen. All it says is normal. Now, obviously, things are not normal. Now, another thing I noticed is that in that little screen in the dash, normally there would be a gear indicator that tells us which gear we are in. Right now, it's not telling us anything. What I do see is that we're almost out of fuel. That fuel light is blinking. Now, if there are people watching that want to bring in their car for diagnostics, I'm going to tell you something shocking. I'm going to bust a myth. There is a myth that tells us that a diagnostician can diagnose a vehicle with a full tank. Well, that's not true. We can. There's no rule you have to bring in your vehicle with an empty tank. Since the car is a no-comm, we can't read fault codes and we don't really have a direction to go in. Now, what should we do next? I think the next thing we should do is try to find out why this vehicle is not communicating. The vehicle communicates with the scan tools on pin 6 and 14 of the DLC. In the next step, we're going to hook up a breakout box so we can measure what's going on those pins and why the vehicle is not communicating. The ignition is on and hooked up the BOP or breakout box to the DLC, so instead of fiddling in those tiny pins, we can now conveniently measure on pin 6 and 14 with our scope and see what's going on. So I hooked up the Pico to those pins and just take a look at this waveform. Now, if you have seen a CAN bus waveform before, you know it's not supposed to look like this. Now, this is the reason the scan tool can't communicate with the vehicle. It is more supposed to look something like this. Now, we need to fix this first before we can possibly read fault codes and move on to the next step. We have to find out what's going on pin 6 and 14. So I opened all data and I looked up the wiring diagram for this specific vehicle. Over here, we have got the DLC and pin 6 and 14. And we can see that basically those two wires are connected to every other module in the vehicle. Now, I suspect that one of those modules is creating our issue. The problem is, it could be each and every one of them. To find out what module is causing our issue, unfortunately, we have to unplug them one by one until this looks something more like that. Now, the problem is accessibility. Most of these modules you can't even see. They're behind the dash or behind the trim. So we're going to start out with the ones that are accessible, and those are the ones under the hood. So we're going to start in the front and work our way back until we have found the culprit. We're going to start out with the engine computer, which is located conveniently right here. So we're going to unplug that, and the scope is still hooked up, and hopefully we get lucky and it's going to be the very first module that we unplug. Now, the engine computer is connected directly to pins 6 and 14 of the DLC, so this could be our culprit. Now, it's unplugged right now, so let's take a look at the waveform. But you can see that the waveform still looks like a mess. So the engine computer was not causing the issue. With the engine computer unplugged, no change, so the engine computer is not causing our issue. So we have to move on to the next module, and the next module is actually pretty close to the engine computer. It's right there behind the battery and in between the air filter. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's there. I have to remove the air filter to get a little bit more access, but that's not a big deal. And that's actually the transmission control unit, or TCU. I partially removed the air filter, and by the way, some of the parts are missing, like this air duct, but the car came as is. I didn't remove that. I don't know if the owner did it or the previous workshop, but this is how the car came to me. Now, with that air filter box removed, we can clearly see the TCU right there. So let's unplug it. And it's actually not so easy with a camera in one hand. Whoa! And when I unplugged it, the wipers came on. Now let's take a look at that waveform. And I think we have found our culprit. When I unplugged the TCU, the wipers came on and it actually sent my air filter box flying through the air. I didn't get that on camera, but another lesson learned, storing tools or parts on the wipers is probably not a good idea when you're working on a vehicle. Now in the next step, I want to do that live. So I'm going to record the screen of the scope. So let me record my screen here. Bear with me. And I think, yeah, we are recording. Now let's unplug the TCU while you guys take a look at that screen. There we go, unplugged. Now let's plug it back in. And the problem should be back. When I unplugged the TCU for the first time, you saw that the wipers came on. Now, apparently, the wipers weren't working. Now, I didn't know that because I never checked, but apparently that was also one of the symptoms. Now, when we unplugged the TCU, the vehicle could communicate again. The network came alive, and at that point, the switching column on the steering wheel could send a message to the BCM, hey, turn on the wipers, because apparently the wipers were still turned on. And it did. The wipers came on and it sent my air filter flying through the air. Now, let's see if we can fully communicate with the vehicle again using the scan tool. I plugged the engine computer back in and I fully scanned the vehicle. Now we can communicate again, and almost all of the modules are red, which makes sense because, of course, there were, let me see, mostly communication faults stored. Now, there are two gray modules. One is not equipped and the other one is the TCM, which of course is unplugged. Let's take a look at the symptoms with the TCU unplugged. Let's turn on the ignition. There we go. And let's turn it off again. And it turns off, and let's see if it stays off. And it certainly looks that way. Now let's turn it on again. And we can see that the wipers are working and the inputs for the climate control came back. So you can see that the dials are working, the knobs are working, so that's all fine. Now unfortunately, the car is still a no crank, no start. Now also the gear indicator didn't come back, and this all kind of makes sense because to be able to start the vehicle needs to be in park. Now with the TCU unplugged, there's no way of telling that the car is in park, so that's probably the reason why it doesn't crank right now. A lot of the car's functions came back, but unfortunately it's still a no crank, no start. And I really hate to end the video like this, but I don't really have a solution for today. But I looked online and a friend of mine traded in an 2010 Qashqai. It's called the Qashqai here in Europe. I think it's called the Nissan Rogue in the States. And although that's a different model, I think it uses the same gearbox. Now, what I can do, I can call him and ask if we can borrow his TCU. And to be honest, I have no idea if a used TCU is going to work on this vehicle. I don't have that experience. Maybe it needs to be programmed. I don't work on a lot of these. And remember, we also still have that used BCM in the vehicle. So I'm going to give him a call and hopefully he will allow us to borrow his TCU. I went to my friend Josh. I actually didn't call him. I went there and I told him I had a YouTube emergency. I looked at him with my puppy eyes and look what I've got. Now, this is a used TCM for a Nissan. Now, it is from a different model and none of the numbers matches. And it has a P on there and mine says MB. So I don't know if it's gonna work, but let's plug it in and let's find out. Now, I'm not gonna fully install it. I'm just gonna hook it up to that connector and let's see what happens. Used, totally wrong TCU installed. Now let's see if we can start the vehicle. Now it is a long shot, but I hope I can show you guys that this car starts and drives again when a TCU is installed. Now let's turn on the ignition. And right now we can see that the gear indicator came back. So let's shift through the gears. That's reverse, neutral, drive. So that works. Let's put it in park and let's start up the vehicle, and it starts up. Now, the engine doesn't sound great. It sounds like something is going on with the serpentine belt, but hey, it is running again. Now let's see if it backs up. Let's put it in reverse. And it backs up. Now let's put it in drive. And it moves forward. Now, that looks like victory to me. The car communicates again. It starts, it runs, it moves, but it obviously needs another TCU. Now, somebody also needs to take a look at that serpentine belt or whatever engine noise that is, but I think they will manage. Now, I plugged the cooling fan back in, but there's one more thing I need to do before I'm able to sleep tonight. I'm gonna have such sweet dreams tonight. I'm gonna sleep like a baby. Now, I don't work on a lot of Nissans, but as I've demonstrated in this video, as long as you keep working systematically, eliminate things, keep using your common sense, eventually you will get to the answer. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, diagnose, hold on. DiagnoseDan, fix it again. See you next time, guys. In the next step, we're gonna hook up the front of the vehicle under the hood, and from there, we're gonna work. Now, this is something I missed. Apparently, the wiper, what?